This video is sponsored by Skillshare. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare Premium. In May 1964, an emerging rock band called The Animals got the opportunity that every upstart group dreams of. They got a chance to open for the original rock star, Chuck Berry. But how does one go about opening for a pioneer and a legend like Chuck Berry? As Animals frontman Eric Burdon put it, I realized one thing: you can't out-rock Chuck Berry. So the Animals went for a different approach. Eric Burdon took the stage under a single red spotlight and sang 12 of the most iconic words in music history. There is a house in New Orleans they call the Rising Sun. Of course, Eric Burdon was far from the first to sing that phrase. Over the past century and more, those 12 words have captured the imagination of hundreds of artists. House of the Rising Sun has become one of the single most performed songs in music history, with renditions in every genre you can think of, from metal to reggae to disco. But through all of these versions, there's been one oft-debated question. What exactly is the House of the Rising Sun? Common wisdom suggests it's a brothel, but it's also been said to be a gambling den, a prison, or even a pub. It's been described as an abstract metaphor, but also a reference to real historical places. And with all of its rich history and myriad potential meanings, the House of the Rising Sun has become a key piece of music mythology and a cornerstone of America's folk history. Let's take a closer look. To find the origins of House of the Rising Sun, we need to look back, way back. The song was likely born from the rural Appalachian hills in the days before radio. At that time, music communities were largely insular, made up of folk songs sung within families, churches, and small communities. These songs would only spread through traveling musicians and medicine shows, where snake oil salesmen would use the songs to drum up interest and peddle their wares. The musicians in these shows would pick up bits and pieces of songs as they traveled, adding verses and changing words to suit each new location. As a result, it's impossible to pinpoint the original author or the exact lyrics of House of the Rising Sun. In the earliest written version from 1925, the song was simply titled Rising Sun, and it was written from the perspective of a poor woman. 8 years later, a traveling musician named Clarence Tom Ashley recorded the oldest version that still survives to this day. In his, the story follows a male rambler, mirroring Ashley's own life.
Many poor boys to destruction has gone, and me, oh God, are one.
Speaking on the song years later, Ashley said that he got it off his grandparents, adding, "It's too old to talk about." And Ashley may have been more right than he knew. Some music historians trace the origin of Rising Sun back to an archetype of English ballad known as the Unfortunate Rake. The Unfortunate Rake is a lament about a life lived in sin, and it can be traced back to the middle of the 16th century. Another theory came from historian Alan Lomax, who thought that Rising Sun had more in common with a song called Matty Groves, which dates back as early as 1613. And whatever the song's roots were, it would be Lomax himself who planted it into American popular culture. Lomax was an ethnomusicologist who made hundreds of field recordings of folk music from the 20th century for the Archive of American Folk Song at the Library of Congress. These recording sessions captured the foundations of the American folk and blues traditions and ended up influencing generations of American musicians to come. One of these recordings was a 1937 session with Georgia Turner. Her version returns to a female perspective, but is actually light on references to the rising sun itself. The most common theme in her version is drinking.
My sweetheart, he's the drunkard, Lord, drink standing near the morning.
Her sweetheart is a drunkard, only satisfied when drunk, and the poor girl is returning to New Orleans to wear a ball and chain. If the ball and chain is metaphorical, this could make the Rising Sun itself a pub. This interpretation fits with the English heritage. House of the Rising Sun was an archaic English term for public houses, or as we now know them today, pubs. But the House of the Rising Sun isn't singing generally about any pub. It seems to be singing about a specific pub in New Orleans. And in the 19th century, there actually was an establishment in New Orleans called the Rising Sun. It advertised in the 1860s as a restaurant and a coffee house. And at the time, New Orleans businesses listed as coffee houses often also sold alcoholic drinks. So is that pub what Georgia Turner was singing about? Well, it's unclear. Lomax never spoke about the specifics of the recording session, but he did write that the song was unique to him at the time. This seems to suggest it was the first time Lomax heard the song, but it certainly wouldn't be the last. Based in Greenwich Village, New York, Lomax would share his recordings with a new generation of folk artists, like Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger. Both artists worked it into their repertoire and eventually recorded their own versions. Woody Guthrie's has a bit more of an upbeat tilt to it, while Pete Seeger's was darker and foreboding, driven by his iconic banjo.
I'm one.
Alan Lomax believed that folklore flourished when it was adopted by many cultures and traditions, and House of the Rising Sun proved the rule. His recordings helped the song enter the zeitgeist of American music, where it began to evolve.
The gambling man drinks down in New Orleans.
The song's lamenting lyrics and roots in American folklore meant it resonated with black musicians. 12-string virtuoso Leadbelly recorded the song twice. In one version, it's an upbeat blues, with Leadbelly singing the part of the down-on-his-luck rambler.
Way down in New Orleans, house called the Rising Sun. Have been the run of a many poor boys, and be a God for one.
In another version he recorded, his wife sings and plays the part of the poor girl. And after these early versions, the legacy of the song continued to grow. By the time the 1960s rolled round, the song was fast becoming a standard. Nina Simone recorded a live performance of the song in 1962, released on the album Live at the Village Gate.
There is a house in New Orleans. They call it the Rising Sun.
While that version is a slow dirge, she would also display the versatility of the song when she recorded it again on her 1967 album, Nina Simone Sings the Blues.
Going back to New Orleans. Race is almost won. Going back, spend my life every day.
Nina Simone's takes on the song were part of a broader movement that was happening around her in Greenwich Village, the folk music revival. At the start of the decade, Joan Baez recorded a slow, haunting version, and it became a staple of the scene after that.
My race is almost run.
And perhaps the most notable version to come out of that Greenwich scene was a version performed by a 20-year-old folk singer who went by the name Bob Dylan.
There is a house down in New Orleans. They call.
It's in this Dylan version that the song as you likely recognize it today really comes into shape. His lyrics sing from the perspective of a young woman, and his vocal performance is just as haunting as Georgia Turner's. But his version featured a novel chord progression for the song, though it wasn't one he came up with himself. Dylan borrowed his chord progression from a close friend, Dave Van Ronk, who would record his own version in 1964.
My mother, she's a tailor.
She sows those new blues.
And not only did Van Ronk record and arrange the song, he actually had his own theory about what the titular House of the Rising Sun was. In Van Ronk's mind, it was a woman's prison. He claimed to have seen a photo of a foreboding stone doorway with a carving on the lintel of a stylized rising sun. It was the Orleans Parish Women's Prison. Van Ronk's arrangement of the song, performed by Dylan, helped it grow to be a hit. Before too long, Van Ronk found himself accused of copying the arrangement of Rising Sun from Dylan's album. I had to stop singing the song, Van Ronk said. Now that was very, very annoying, but I couldn't blame that on him. It was this Dylan version that brought the song back across the Atlantic, to the very country where it might have had its earliest roots. As a traditional folk song, House of the Rising Sun was in the public domain, and thus it was easy for the Animals to put their own spin on it when they were looking for something to wow their audience. They took the chords from the Van Ronk arrangement, but decided to electrify them and break them down into an ominous set of arpeggios. The Animals also changed the time signature from a standard 4/4 beat into 6/8 time, which helped lend the tune more urgency. Their lyrics are similar to Dylan's arrangement, but with the perspective shifted to male.
And it's been the ruin of many a poor boy. And God, I know I'm one.
When Burden sang the song, he was tapping into his own lived experience. He had been born to a lower middle-class family in an English mining town, and at 17 he ran away to Paris, where he hung out near bordellos, an experience that he said helped his research for the song. This lends credence to the theory that the song is talking about a brothel, and that theory has a New Orleans connection as well. There was a small, short-lived Rising Sun hotel in the French Quarter, which burned down in 1822. In a recent search, archaeologists found an unusual amount of rouge pots and cosmetics on site, as well as some advertisements that may have euphemistically indicated prostitution. For the Animals, House of the Rising Sun was an instant sensation. It was so well received on tour that they decided to record it only 9 days after its debut. Between tour stops, the group popped into a London recording studio and pounded out the single version in one take. This version made House of the Rising Sun a transatlantic hit. It reached the top of the UK singles chart in July 1964 and topped the US charts 2 months later. According to Animals drummer John Steele, Bob Dylan told him that when he first heard the Animals version on his car radio, he stopped to listen, jumped out of his car, and banged on the bonnet. The song even provided part of the impetus for Dylan to go electric. And for Dylan, the song came full circle. Like Van Ronk before him, the popularity of the Animals version eclipsed his own, and Dylan began to face his own accusations of theft. And after the Animals version, the song was truly in the pop music zeitgeist. For the next 50 years, hundreds more artists would cover it, each putting their own spin on it. But all of these disparate versions hold one commonality: the House of the Rising Sun. So then, what is the house? For every artist, there's a different answer. It's a jail and a gambling house, a brothel and a pub, changing depending on who's singing the words. But whether it's a rambler, a gambler, a prostitute, or a pauper, the meaning of the House of the Rising Sun is always the same. It's a place of vice, a place of darkness and foreboding, and a place that one desperately wants to avoid, yet is constantly drawn back to. What's important isn't the specifics of the house, it's what the house represents. The house exists for the protagonist and always will, haunting and beckoning them, tempting them to fall back into their own demise. And that's why I think it's resonated so hard through all of its different versions. It speaks to a universal fear that we all hold. So long as any vice has its grip on our hearts, the House of the Rising Sun could be round any corner for all of us, patiently waiting for the moment when we're at our most desperate, most vulnerable, so it can lure us in and call us back to our demise. I get a lot of people that ask me how I edit my videos to look like they do. Most of my editing is done in Adobe After Effects, which is an incredibly powerful, but also an incredibly difficult software. If you want to take a crack at making something like I do, I can't recommend my friend Philip D'Amico's Skillshare class highly enough. You probably know Philip best for his channel Volksgeist, which makes videos a lot like mine. And in his Skillshare class, he'll teach you a lot of the exact same techniques that I use. But of course, that's not all. Skillshare is an incredible online learning community with thousands of courses that can help you learn new skills or hone your existing talents. Another new course you might want to check out is Thomas Frank's Productivity for Creatives, which will teach you the habits you need if you want to achieve your creative goals, and maybe even try to make a living off of creative work. And like I said, there's thousands more courses on the platform, covering everything from photography to cooking to business. If this piques your interest even a little bit, then you can check it out at no cost to yourself by following the link in the description. The first 1,000 people to click that link will get a month of Skillshare Premium absolutely free. So please, give it a shot and teach yourself something that you've always wanted to learn.